In the next 15 or 20 minutes or so, I will talk about opportunities for immigrants in Europe to participate in elections. I have called my contribution Seizing Opportunities to Become an Active Citizen. As I go on with my presentation, it will become clear that it is not so much a matter of immigrants seizing opportunities to participate, but it is more a matter of host societies offering opportunities to participate. So in that sense, my first opening shot is a slight correction on the title of my intervention. What I would argue also is that if we indeed in Europe want to increase the participation of immigrants in the political process, we have to think about comprehensive approaches and not think that we can fix it quickly with one or two measures. You may have already got a clear idea that election participation, political participation processes are complicated and complex. This certainly also applies to an immigrant population or a population with a lot of members with an immigrant background, however that is defined. And that is why I would call for comprehensive approaches to that in actually three areas. The first is indeed to guarantee and to define and to grant and operationalize civic and political rights. The second, and that is really a whole set of measures, and again, not just one thing you can easily and quickly fix. The second is access to nationality, which is usually and also today very clearly connected with the issue of political participation. And thirdly, and if I have time, I will also address a third area where we have to take a series of measures, and that is looking at the political machinery itself and see how open and closed that machinery is to let immigrants participate on an equal footing. This is basically, we could kind of summarize by, do political parties practice what they preach? Now, I am going to use a research we have undertaken a couple of times now, since roughly 2005, which is known under the name as MIPEX, the Migrant Integration Policy Index, where we looked at 7 areas that are important for immigrant integration, and that includes, indeed, political participation and access to nationality. When it comes to political participation, we have looked at measures in 30-odd countries in North America and Europe. We have looked at what types of policies are being adopted in those countries, what kind of measures are adopted in areas such as political liberties, which includes the right to form and participate in associations for immigrants. Can they or can they not become a member of a political party and participate? And also, can immigrants create and establish and operate their own media? We also looked at the electoral rights. And to cut a very long story short, but we settled on checking on a number of indicators. We looked at voting rights at the national, local and regional level. And also we looked at whether immigrants could vote or whether they also could stand for elections. Since in quite a lot of countries voting rights are not granted, or reluctantly, or slowly, or partially, quite often as an alternative, so-called consultative bodies are being set up, and so we wanted to look in those states which countries had done that, and what the mandate of those consultative bodies are, and so on. And last but not least, we look at what we call implementation measures. This is about informing the public in general, but with specific outreach programs to the immigrant community. And also we looked at public funding for immigrant organizations. Now, scholars among you know that electoral rights never stand on their own or should not stand on their own. So the fact that you have implementing policies is equally important as having your rights secured. Now, if I then look, so we did that research, we did that 2 times actually, in 2005 and 2010, and I present, or I base my interventions here on the 2010 outcomes. I have juxtaposed countries we know as traditional immigration countries, and I thought it would be nice to look at Australia, Canada, and the United States, which are included in our research. And I looked at the EU countries. And what we see, first of all, what we see here, that electoral rights are underdeveloped. There is a score from 0 to 100. And as you can see, the electoral rights do not even hit the 50%, which means that in most countries, immigrants do not have the right to either vote or stand in national, but also local elections. And there is some difference between Europe and the traditional immigration countries. Europe seemed to do a bit better than Canada, United States, and Australia. It is interesting also to know that political liberties are guaranteed in all traditional immigration countries, but that Europe is clearly lacking behind. And the implementation policies, a similar story could be made that traditional immigration countries do better than Europe. But the differences call for further investigation. So the next slide shows you how in Europe and how divided actually Europe is on this. You see that the electoral rights in the EU12, and the EU12 is mainly the new member states, but they, by and large, with of course a couple of exceptions, also are the newer countries of immigration in Europe. By and large, not entirely, but by and large, you could argue that. And that the EU15, the old member states, at least includes a lot of countries which have a longer tradition: France, Germany, Austria, etc. Sweden, the Netherlands, which have a longer history and are old member states, if you want. And what we see here, that the implementation of policies in let's say, the EU12 is extremely low, just as electoral rights, and worrying political liberties, such as the right to form associations to become a member of a political party. Now, if we are then looking at electoral rights in particular, you see that only a few countries do well, and those are in pink, and are island and Scandinavian countries, and the Netherlands, where in these countries immigrants have the right to participate in local elections and stand and vote. And for the rest of the countries in varying nuances of blue, they have given either regional voting rights, or only you can vote and not stand in elections. Now, as I said, quite often voting rights is kind of the ultimate thing you want, and you have as a backup position a consultation mechanism where in an organized way consultation takes place with immigrant groups. And so it is an alternative. Well, we don't give you voting rights, but we consult with you. Now the interesting thing is that that is not the case. It is usually the case that where there is no voting rights, where there are no voting rights, there is neither consultation, or where there is consultation, there is probably also voting rights. So they cannot be easily swapped. And so what is often said in political discussions and in policy discussions, okay, we will consult but don't give them voting rights, is not true. Often, also in policy debates and in public opinion, they said, no, we cannot give immigrants voting rights, they first have to become citizens. And once you are a citizen, you can vote. That is actually a point of view I strongly defend. You know, a short track to citizenship will solve your voting and your political participation problem, at least formally. And so it becomes interesting to see how quickly then you can become a citizen and fully participate. And we looked at who could apply as for citizenship, what are the conditions, and also we wanted to know what the security is of when you apply and you don't get it, can you challenge that in court? Is it i.e. a right, or is it a favor? And we also wanted to know whether once you have it, can it be taken away from you? And we looked at dual nationality and wanted to find out, because we know, or we think we know, that dual nationality facilitates or makes it more attractive for immigrants to take the nationality of the country they live in. Now, so we made a review on the basis of 20 to 30 indicators grouped around those 4 issues. We looked at the measures in place in those 30 countries. Warned by the difference between all the new member states, I started to look at them again, a special grouping. And you see that dual nationality, and it has been said this morning, begins to become accepted in the EU 15 more than in the EU 12. Also, more persons are let into the procedure and are eligible to citizenship in the EU 15 than in the EU 12. And the conditions, they are almost equal. So once you apply and are entitled to apply, then the conditions are fairly much the same. The message we take away from this is that, yes, it is not easy to become a citizen, and of course, if you then look at Europe and you want to single out particular countries, you see that in some countries it is more difficult than in others. And if you want to find it out on what topics and what particular measures that is, you simply go to the MyPAC's website and you will find that information in great detail. So it is difficult. It is, as with political participation, the differences in Europe, within Europe, whether we group them EU 12 or EU 15, are rather big, which you could arguably say calls for European measures and a European approach. But we also know that those two issues are not among the issues the EU has direct and very clear competence. So there must be other ways of addressing the differences in Europe. Then, as I said, often it is said, okay, no political participation without citizenship. We can clearly see that, as was the case with consultation mechanisms and political participation, we see here a tendency that those countries that are more forthcoming in facilitating citizenship and provide access are also the countries where they score better on political participation. Or where you're bad in one area, if you want, you're also bad in another. And so again, in policy debates, to say, okay, what actually my position is / was. Why bother about political participation and granting voting rights to immigrants? You know, do a fast-track citizenship. Interesting and nice this may be, reality tells me that probably it is not a viable option. Now, my last point, Madam Chair, if I'm allowed, another series of measures that needs to be taken, and it is looking at the political machinery itself. If you, as I do, and every citizen does, of course, if we are looking at political parties' programs, we are often moved or injured by the positions they take. But let's look at it from the bright side. If you hear statements about the necessity and the need for immigrants to integrate, and that this nowadays is also a so-called two-way process, that the society should open up and let immigrants fully participate in public life, in society, in economic life, in cultural life, etc. And anti-discrimination measures need to be adopted. And if you all read that and then begin to ask yourself, but look at the political machinery itself as a social entity, what is it then what this social entity is doing itself? What are political parties doing themselves to open up for people with an immigrant background? And we started to look around in political parties in 3 countries where we took the United Kingdom, France and Germany, and we started to talk with party X, if you want, with people who are really within the party, and we were asking them questions along the lines you see on the screen. We were asking them what they do to themselves as an organization. Not what they want other organizations in society as a whole do, but what is it what you do? How do you capitalize on what immigrants bring, what all citizens bring to society, including those with an immigrant background? So not only talk about immigrants as a problem, but see them as an opportunity. What is it what you do as an organization to respond to it, and how do you address their needs in the way you operate and what you say and do? What is your strategy to recruit them, not only as a potential voter, which could be the first 2 bullet points, but also as members of your board, as a member, as a militant? What is it, what you do to make sure that they can become your elected official? And last but not least, what is your employment strategy? How diverse is your workforce? Is that a true reflection of the diversity of the population? And also, how diverse are your suppliers? As an organization, we all have suppliers, haven't we? So we talked to those 3 parties. I'm not going to share with you the results, because we probably will all start crying, because this is an area which is completely underdeveloped in political parties. Political parties have a tendency, and I don't want to do injustice, but maybe for the sake of the conversation, but they see themselves more as talking about society as a whole than an organization that must practice what they preach. So the results were very poor, and that's why we decided, and that will be my last slide, Madam Chair, we decided to help the political parties and developed a self-assessment tool along those lines. We developed over 60 indicators on the basis of which they could assess themselves what their, if you want, outreach strategies should and could be. And that hopefully will, and we have the tool ready actually. So we did the research, we talked to political parties, we talked with political parties in the European Parliament to see what it is, what they did at the European level. We will publish the tool, the self-assessment tool, in January, and in this house we will present the results. Now, if you want to receive an invitation for that event and by then the toolkit and the self-assessment tool, you simply send me an email on this address. So to conclude, let me say again, if we want to provide opportunities to immigrants to fully participate in political and civic life, we have to think about comprehensive approaches in those three areas, namely securing rights that makes that immigrants can seize opportunities to participate. So it is about rights. And it is about the second dimension then is looking at access to citizenship, speed that up, remove obstacles, promote facilitators of that. And last but not least, the political machineries must look at themselves. And once that is done, I will come back and talk about how immigrants really have seized the opportunities offered to them by our society. Thank you very much.